It seems that both the left and the right have had real moves towards authoritarianism lately. The left, obviously, we've seen in the Biden administration clamping down on free speech hard, and the right has clearly developed a cult of personality around Donald Trump. Both of those, to me, as somebody who is first interested in civil liberty and second interested in party politics, seem absolutely terrifying, because both sides can justify their growing authoritarianism by citing the other side's authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you might cite right now how the left's authoritarianism is worse than the right's. And if I was talking to somebody on the left, they would do the inverse. And it's just kind of trying to watch this from an objective perspective. Obviously, I sit in the corner that I sit in, but I try to, when I think about these issues, as I'm developing an opinion, put myself in a neutral perspective, because I think that that's the best way to formulate ideas on these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. I see how you could make a very salient point from both sides, and how most people don't think about the other side's perspective. They only see the strongest arguments of their own side and the weakest arguments of the other side, and end up getting, driven into the authoritarian camp that they believe in. What do you make of that?
Well, and I'm sure you know, as far as political science goes, that people tend towards the extremes and always have. That whenever you put a group of people together with the same political ideology, you tend to see that those with the most extreme views within that purview tend to dominate, and then the group tends to kind of migrate towards those extremes. So yes, 100% right that it's an issue. As far as, and I went to one Trump rally with a friend of mine, and I was shocked, in all honesty, by the number of people there that did kind of engage in this weird cult of personality, because I hadn't really run into it before. And in all honesty, it was kind of off-putting, because I didn't like it. It didn't make sense. It wasn't logical. Their support of him had very little to do with, his policy or his positions or anything like that. So I was disappointed by that. But what I've also noticed, and I've seen this with, conversations with people that I've met on campus, and et cetera, is that the opposite is true, because there's a cult of anti-personality, right? That there's such a visceral hatred for Donald Trump that whatever Donald Trump says, the left is going to disagree with, right? So it's really weird, because you can find where probably about 85% of the populace will decide their political position based on what Donald Trump says, right? And that is very bad. Like, the fact that that is the case is very bad. And there's a bunch of tweets going around whenever Republicans came out in support of the freedom protests in Cuba, basically supporting them, right? And then the leftists who had originally been supporting them were like, well, whenever fascists start to agree with you, you have to really reconsider your position, right? That means that the reason they're going to change their position has nothing to do with what they believe or the fact pattern, but rather because they don't want to agree with Republicans, right? And that is a terrible, terrible state for a political. You can't have democracy work, or a constitutional republic work, if that's the way people are thinking. If they're putting political ideology and political affiliation above the facts, right? As far as kind of the moves for totalitarianism, I think it's a little bit misleading to compare a cult of personality that a political base has for somebody who doesn't hold political office or any political power versus the move towards authoritarianism, where people are trying to mandate vaccine passports. You're calling for the private reading of text messages. You're working with private companies to censor free speech. And these also are a little bit more damaging because you don't have a term limit. on these types of policies, capabilities, or restrictions
one is
of
completely
freedom.
institutionally supported, and the other is completely extra institutional.
Yes.
Institutionally supported totalitarianism is much more threatening in the long run because it can just kind of creep its way along until, like the frog in the pot of boiling water. It
Yeah.
starts out at an acceptable temperature, and then you have boiled frog.
Yeah, it's been happening, right? It's been happening since the Patriot Act, right? It's not something that is new, right? So it was kind of funny to me whenever people were all up in arms about, the government's going to be reading our text messages. I'm like, no, the government's been reading your text messages. Okay, right. Just so we're clear.
We were probably 12 and 13 when Edward Snowden revealed this to us.
Yes.
And we were probably 1 or 2 when the Patriot Act made this whole thing legal. Which, by the way, thank you, Bush. Thank you, Cheney. Some outstanding Republicans there.
Oh, yeah.
Really,
true.
really
the faces of conservatism.
Yeah, those guys. And, glad
well, again, I
got into all those nice wars.
Oh, yeah. Well, I go back to, it's kind of the same point that they're all friends. You got the picture of Clinton, Bush, and Obama. They're all having fun at the baseball game together. To think of them as conservatives is wrong, just like to think of Obama or Clinton as Democrats is wrong. They're both members of the establishment. They're both members of essentially a uniparty that has really held political power in this country for 40 years. But yeah. As far as the authoritarianism goes, it is an issue. But I do fail to see how they are on equal footing. I hate the cult of personality around Trump. I detest it on a very, even on a visceral level, not to mention, the negative impacts it has for kind of the development of conservatism, because it's kind of put a blocker on, people are like, oh, I'm a conservative and therefore I'm Trump, and Trump is conservatism and conservatism is Trump. And it just loses and dilutes kind of the real draw that conservatism should be, because conservatism shouldn't be reliant on any one person. It shouldn't be emblematic of any one person, but this cult of personality does exist within the Republican Party and within the Trump fan base. I don't think it's the majority.
And it also means that Trump's failings then become the conservative failings. Like Trump's failing on the national debt was absurd, and it's probably the most important thing that he failed on, and nobody called him out for it, because to call him out would be to call the whole conservative movement out, because the conservative movement did not exist outside of Donald Trump.
Right.
The conservatives have now lost their voice to speak out about that issue because of their successive failings in the Bush and Trump administrations. I mean, for my whole life, every single presidency has just been a spending presidency.
Yep.
And it's now reached to the point where the snowball is rolling very fast. But that's largely because there is no room for a Paul Ryan type, who obviously was Mr. Fiscal Conservative. He either had to get on the Trump train and be MAGA, Trump, or get run over by the Trump train, and he chose to get run over by the Trump train. But the fact that there was no air left in the room for these, and say what you will about Paul Ryan on that issue, he was very right and continues to be very right. And Trump is wrong, and doesn't indicate that he's getting any better. And if that's the future of the party on that issue, which to me is very important, we failed. And that's largely because of the Trump cult of personality. That being said, it's a two-edged sword, because without the Trump cult of personality, the feckless conservatives will step right back in, because there will be nothing to hold them to account anymore. So it will be, on the one hand, I don't want Trump to run again, but on the other hand, I want him to remain powerful enough for long enough to keep the uniparty from reemerging, to put the fear of God in the hearts of these conservatives that are going to the ball game with Barack Obama, that there will be a price to pay for that.
Yeah, that's really the $1 million question whenever it comes to the future of conservatism. Because we know that the political opportunists will waste no time in jumping back in and seizing the reins of power and going back to the good old days where both right and left establishment types make tons of money, and America continues to lose its war with China. We continue to get buried in debt. Inflation will probably continue to grow, and the American standard of living will slowly be dragged away into the dustbin of history, and who knows where that ends up.
Call Edward Gibbon. It's the decline and fall of the American empire here.
Exactly.
Unless we take active steps to resist that.
Yes.
And while Trump is not very effective in the resistance, at least he voices the importance of that, and maybe can inspire us to elect some people, possibly a Ron DeSantis, who would be forced to come at it from the MAGA America First perspective, but would be able to do so in a way of somebody who's more emotionally mature than most elementary school students and has experience in government, which could be somebody who actually affects meaningful change. That's kind of the best path that I see for the conservative, really just anti-oligopoly, however you want to put it, anti-uniparty, yes, pro-normal people being able to live their life party.
Right. Which you would think would be really popular, but truth is stranger than fiction.
70 million people voted for Donald Trump for that reason. Unfortunately,
careful what numbers you cite. YouTube might get on you for this.
40 million people voted for Donald Trump.
I think, maybe 5, maybe his immediate family if they could stand him.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an interesting conversation. I really like talking to you because I think you fill a lot of blind spots in the ways that I think about these kinds of issues. You have a very interesting perspective, and maybe we do this again sometime
I'd love to.
Sooner than 6 months.
Yeah, let's do it.